If you needed one single name to define the sheer, overwhelming scale of wealth during the Gilded Age, you didn't need to look much further than Astor.
Not at all. I mean, they were more than just rich. They didn't just own a few fancy properties.
No, they were foundational to New York City, buying up, undeveloped swampland and turning it into the most expensive real estate on earth.
They were, and this is quite literally true, the landlords of New York.
Their mansions on Fifth Avenue set the gold standard of opulence, and their name was just synonymous with untouchable generational power.
It was. Okay, so let's unpack this dizzying history and figure out what exactly it cost them.
Because what's truly fascinating here, and what our sources really force us to confront, is that glittering facade.
Right. For a family that basically invented the idea of American aristocracy and old money, the Astors were, at the same time, the architects of immense human misery.
That's the core of it, isn't it? That enormous fortune was built, brick by brick, not just on Manhattan Rock, but on the backs of poor immigrants living in these notorious overcrowded slums.
Slums that the Astors owned and maintained for maximum profit.
So we have this incredible contradiction right from the start. Breathtaking wealth born from ruthless greed. And that internal tension, it didn't stay internal, did it?
Not even close. The family's history is just punctuated by these bitter, very public feuds that literally reshaped the Manhattan skyline.
Creating landmarks like the Waldorf-Astoria.
Exactly. And ultimately, it all climaxes with a world-famous tragedy that extinguishes the patriarch on the deck of the Titanic.
It's a story where unimaginable wealth provided absolutely no immunity from scandal, betrayal, and a really dramatic final implosion.
That really sets our mission for today.
It does. We are diving deep into the material you shared with us. We need to trace this bloodline back to its shockingly humble beginnings.
The son of a German butcher, of all things.
Right, and follow that trail across 2 centuries and 2 continents. Our goal here is to reveal the staggering human and moral price every single generation paid to keep that dynasty alive.
And you should get ready, because this story doesn't end with a gentle whimper of fading glory.
No. It ends with grand larceny and a dramatic scattering of billions.
To truly grasp the colossal scale of the Astors, we absolutely must start at the absolute bottom. I mean, the very beginning.
Okay, so where does that take us?
The dynasty begins not with a grand manor in New York, but in Waldorf, Germany, where Johann Jacob Astor was born in 1763.
And his family weren't merchants or landowners.
Not at all. They were simple working people. His father was a butcher, and the records we have suggest he was perhaps more focused on the local beer hall than on, growing his trade.
So young John Jacob, as he would become known in the U.S., was defined by ambition, but had absolutely zero starting capital.
None. He recognized immediately that the old world couldn't hold that ambition, especially not in a small German town.
So the path he chose was, it was drastic.
At 16, he just left. He traveled first to London, where he learned English, and worked for his uncle's musical instrument business.
Just methodically saving every penny he could.
Every single one. Then, in 1780s, he sets off for the United States. He arrives in this brand new nation that was just finding its economic feet. A place where opportunity, though, chaotic.
It was boundless.
It was boundless. And he didn't start with mansions or banks. He started with raw animal hides.
He plunged into the brutal high-stakes world of the fur trade.
It was a really dangerous business. We're talking long, difficult travel, dealing with extreme weather, and these very complex negotiations across cultural lines.
So the model was simple enough. Astor would buy raw hides, often from Native Americans, and then turn around and sell those pelts.
Especially beaver fur, which was hugely fashionable in Europe.
For huge profits in London and Paris.
Huge profits. But his first move wasn't just to be a good merchant, it was to be a great consolidator.
What was the first undeniable sign of Astor's strategic ruthlessness in the market?
It was his desire for control. I mean, he wasn't content merely participating in the market, he sought to dominate it.
He wanted the whole thing.
The whole thing. He built this vast commercial network that stretched globally, a supply chain that, shockingly quickly, rivaled the dominant power of the time.
Which was the mighty Hudson's Bay Company.
The absolute giant. And that showed his intent right there. He was aiming for total control, not just market share.
And he achieved that control, didn't he, in 1808 by establishing the American Fur Company.
He did. We hear about monopolies today, but what this early monopoly meant in the context of the young United States was just unprecedented power.
So how did it work?
The American Fur Company consolidated all his resources, his ships, his trading posts, his political connections, to systematically eliminate competitors.
We're talking about one of the very first true monopolies in American history.
Absolutely. He controlled the trade routes, he dictated the prices, and he effectively turned beaver pelts harvested in the deep wilderness into European gold, flowing directly into his personal coffers.
It was financial engineering on a massive, almost unchecked scale.
It sounds incredibly lucrative, but, any resource-based business is ultimately finite. The fur trade would eventually decline.
Yet Astor's genius endured because he grasped a fundamental truth about this rapidly expanding young nation.
And that truth was that the fur trade was temporary, but land was permanent.
He got it. He grasped that in the rapidly expanding United States, especially in Manhattan, land was the ultimate enduring currency.
He realized that New York City was destined to become the commercial center of the continent, and every single inch of that island would eventually be priceless.
So he systematically shifted his focus from pelts to parcels.
And he started remarkably young, showing this immense foresight. He was only 26 years old when he made his first recorded land purchase in 1789.
And he just never stopped buying. He bought in massive chunks.
The legendary example, the one that really captures his almost prophetic foresight, is his purchase of a massive 70-acre farm.
And this is way outside the settled part of the city at the time, right?
Yeah. Oh, completely. We have to remember what this land was then. Undeveloped, muddy, northern farmland.
And that acreage, it would eventually become the literal crossroads of the world.
Times Square, stretching up to what is now 46th Street.
Just imagine the sheer audacity and patience it took to buy undeveloped farmland and realize this will one day be the epicenter of global commerce.
That wasn't just investing. That was speculation on an epic generational scale.
And his real estate strategy was, from what the sources say, cautious, patient, and brutally effective.
And the key factor is what he didn't do. He almost never built anything himself.
Which seems counterintuitive.
It does, but he preferred to simply lease the raw land on long-term contracts. Think of the genius here. Others took on the financial risk and the responsibility of development, construction, maintenance.
While Astor just sat back and collected the steady, ever-growing ground rent.
It was pure low-risk leverage. As New York exploded in population and importance over the next 50 years, Astor's wealth naturally skyrocketed without him ever having to lay a single brick or, deal with a broken boiler.
His money was compounding exponentially, passively.
And by the time he died in 1848, John Jacob Astor, I wasn't just wealthy, he was a titan in a financial category of his own.
America's first multi-millionaire, leaving an estimated estate of $20 million.
Which is a figure that's almost impossible to grasp today.
Right. We mentioned the sources clarifying the comparison to GDP earlier, but let's make that relatable. What kind of power did that much concentrated liquid wealth afford him?
It was staggering. The analysis of that $20 million shows it was proportional to a significant percentage of the entire U.S. GDP at the time.
So, to put it simply,
imagine one man today owning the equivalent of, say, half of today's entire tech sector. Not just the companies, but the underlying infrastructure.
Wow. That level of concentrated liquid wealth allowed him to be immune to political pressure, to influence Congress, and to move markets just by shifting his assets.
He wasn't just rich. He was a fundamental financial pillar of the young nation. He built this colossal financial foundation that succeeding generations didn't have to earn.
They only had to manage it.
Exactly. And the legacy of the patriarch was divided. We know he left money to found the Astor Library, which ultimately became the core of the New York Public Library.
A nod to high-minded philanthropy.
A very necessary nod given his reputation. But the vast majority of the wealth, the dynasty-sustaining money, went to his second son, William Backhouse Astor.
Why the second son?
His eldest son, John Jacob Astor Jr., was unfortunately deemed unstable and received a far smaller, though still significant, inheritance.
So this established a pattern. The vast fortune was conditional. It required stability and the focus to maintain it.
John Jacob turned ambition into an unimaginable fortune. William Backhouse Astor was now tasked with protecting and growing something that was, frankly, too big to fail.
But the real story is the moral compromise inherent in that growth. So, the founder, John Jacob I, was the adventurer and the visionary who built the empire out of sheer will.
He really was. But when William Backhouse Astor inherited that enormous mantle in 1848, he took on a completely different role.
He was the manager, The methodical guardian of the money focused solely on optimization.
He was the perfect, ruthless bureaucrat for the fortune. William Backhouse Astor was quiet, reserved, and utterly focused on the bottom line.
His first move was to get out of the fur trade entirely.
Immediately, he sold off the last fading vestiges of the fur business. He knew the real reliable money was locked into the rising value of Manhattan land.
His strategy was relentless. Buy, hold, and lease.
Pure, unadulterated, hands-off land speculation and passive income generation.
And that strategy was wildly successful. Under his meticulous watch, the family's portfolio didn't just grow. It ballooned to hundreds of properties sprawling across Manhattan.
And they cemented their nickname, the landlords of New York. Their physical dominance was undeniable.
Exactly. Not only did they own commercial giants like the Astor House, which was at the time the gold standard for hotels,
but their name became physically etched into the city's geography. We still have Astor Place, Astor Court, and Astoria in Queens.
all monuments to their increasing, overwhelming land power.
He was incredibly effective at the mission set by his father. William more than doubled the family wealth, leaving an estate of nearly $50 million when he died in 1875.
But this massive success is where the glittering Gilded Age narrative completely slams into the ugly, brutal reality of 19th century New York.
This is the critical juncture. This incredible wealth was built directly on the surging population of Manhattan. As wave after wave of poor immigrants, Irish, German, and later Italians and Eastern Europeans, flooded New York City.
The demand for cheap, quick housing became astronomical.
And who owned the land that provided that housing? The Astors. They became major owners of tenement housing.
So let's talk about the physical reality of these properties. What were the conditions like in the buildings they owned and profited from?
We are talking about conditions that are almost unimaginable today. I mean, these were buildings that were often little more than flimsy, quickly erected wooden structures on prime land, just packed floor to ceiling with families.
Chronically overcrowded, dark.
Dark because interior rooms often had no windows or light, and terrifyingly unsanitary. Plumbing was minimal or non-existent, which led to rampant disease like cholera and tuberculosis.
The Astors were profiting directly from human misery, from the city's deepest squalor.
And the public, and especially journalists like Jacob Riis, who documented these conditions, they certainly noticed the cold indifference of the Astors, didn't they?
Oh, they absolutely did. The family gained a reputation as cold, untouchable, ruthless slumlords. The sources document that a specific damning term was coined by the press and used widely to describe their exploitative methods.
And that term was Astorized.
Astorized. That is just chilling.
It was meant to be. If a property was Astorized, it meant it had been systematically stripped of all conceivable amenities. Maintenance was ignored entirely.
And the buildings were rented out for maximum profit per square foot, with minimum zero-sum upkeep.
It was the ultimate expression of efficiency married to a complete lack of compassion.
That paints a picture of mechanical cruelty. The rent collection must have been equally harsh.
Unforgiving. The records show that falling behind by even a small amount meant immediate eviction, regardless of sickness or circumstances. There was no leeway.
So no compassion at all.
William Backhouse Astor supposedly made some slight attempts to renovate the worst properties, maybe a cosmetic fix here or there, but the overall business model,
The systemic profiting from the desperate need for housing.
remained entirely brutally intact.
But if the wealth was so colossal and the conditions so publicly known, why wasn't there more sustained public outcry or legal challenge in New York? How could they operate with such impunity?
Well, their impunity stemmed from several factors. First, they owned the courts of public opinion through their deep pockets and political connections. Second, the sheer scale of their operation was overwhelming. They weren't the only slumlords.
But they were the biggest.
By far. And third, they wielded the shield of philanthropy.
Ah, the stunning contradiction. Tell us more about how the Astors used philanthropy in this period.
It was the perfect moral offset. I mean, think about the stark, almost unbelievable contrast.
On one hand,
The Astors were donating massive sums to establish revered cultural institutions, the libraries, the museums, the hospitals, effectively becoming the untouchable patrons of high culture.
but on the other hand, that money, the very source of their social legitimacy, flowed directly from the rent paid by the suffering residents of their slum properties.
They were the architects of squalor and the saviors of high art simultaneously.
That moral compromise, solid gold, cemented with the deepest suffering, is the acid that began to eat away at the dynasty's public image and eventually their internal peace.
Precisely. By the time the third generation came along, they had all the money in the world, but they desperately needed to translate that cash into legitimate social power.
They needed to prove they were aristocracy, not just rich slumlords.
Exactly. And that pursuit of social power is what eventually led to the internal combustion that changed the New York skyline forever.
Speaking of translating money into power, we now arrive at the true queen of the dynasty, the woman who took the Astor name and made it the ultimate social credential. Caroline Schermerhorn Astor.
Her husband, William Backhouse Astor Jr., preferred sailing his yacht rather than dealing with society.
So she took the job of transforming the family's colossal fortune into a social weapon.
Caroline was absolutely formidable. She understood that in America, unlike in Europe, titles had to be manufactured, and she set about manufacturing the most exclusive title of all, the Mrs. Astor.
She worked with her trusted friend and social consultant, Ward McAllister, to essentially invent the concept of an American aristocracy.
An aristocracy based on lineage and tradition, not just railroads or fur pelts.
And that invention manifested in the most famous, rigid social code in American history, the 400.
Yes, and the sources are delightfully specific about the origin of that number. It was supposedly the exact number of people who could comfortably fit into our massive, lavish ballroom at her Fifth Avenue home.
So it wasn't arbitrary. It was a physical constraint turned into an absolute, rigid social code.
It was. If your family wasn't on that list, you simply did not exist in New York society.
And this list enforced old money and established lineage above all else. This is where we get the fantastic anecdote about the Vanderbilts.
The Vanderbilts had an absolutely mind-boggling railroad fortune, the definition of the new, dynamic American economy, but they were famously excluded for years.
Why?
Caroline considered their wealth too raw, too industrial, too vulgar. She policed American society with an iron fist, ensuring the Astors and their selected associates remained at the absolute, undisputed apex.
But the iron-fisted rule was broken not by the newly rich, but by her own blood.
Yes. The internal feud began when her nephew, William Waldorf-Astor, who had inherited the bulk of the estate from his own father, who was William Backhouse Jr.'s older brother, came home from diplomatic service.
And believed his wife, Mary, should be the true senior Mrs. Astor.
He was technically correct. He was the heir to the senior branch of the family line, the son of the elder brother.
But Caroline had been running society for decades. She was not giving up her throne.
Not a chance. Her response was a brilliant display of social warfare. She had her calling cards re-engraved to read simply, Mrs. Astor, dropping the initial.
She was declaring, there is only one.
That's amazing. War fought with stationery. But the conflict escalated quickly when William Waldorf and Mary were pointedly left off the guest list for her next grand ball.
That was not just a snub. That was a public, deliberate social annihilation in that era.
It was. And William Waldorf, inheriting the founder's ruthlessness and perhaps fueled by years of pent-up resentment, retaliated with an act of truly spectacular physical revenge.
He ordered the demolition of his own father's stately mansion, which stood directly next door to Caroline's Fifth Avenue home.
Wait, he didn't sell it. He destroyed it.
He destroyed it. Just imagine the scene on Fifth Avenue, the dust, the noise, the sheer chaos of a demolition zone right next to the palace of the reigning social queen.
It was a massive, unmistakable declaration of war. He wasn't just moving out, he was turning the neighborhood into an industrial hellscape just to spite her.
And what he built in its place, I mean, the appetizer was the demolition. The main course was the Waldorf Hotel.
Yes. He replaced the mansion with a massive, architecturally spiteful 13-story commercial hotel, the Waldorf Hotel.
And it was designed to completely overshadow his aunt's home.
Completely. Blocking her light, introducing noisy commercial traffic, and effectively turning her exclusive residential neighborhood into a noisy commercial district. His goal was purely to make her life unbearable and force her out.
That is next-level family rivalry. But Caroline, the queen of society, refused to lose. How did she respond to having a giant commercial hotel next door?
Well, she was cornered, but she was not defeated. She and her son, John Jacob Astor IV, decided that if they couldn't beat the commercialization, they would join it and dominate it.
So they tore down her own mansion.
Her own mansion, and built an even taller, even more opulent hotel right next door, the Astoria.
So now you have two massive buildings, the Waldorf and the Astoria, standing side by side, physical monuments to a nasty family feud.
Exactly. They were physical symbols of internal combustion. But eventually, the prospect of enormous profit, the sheer commercial success of the two hotels, overcame family pride.
The cousins finally, begrudgingly, agreed to connect the buildings.
With a magnificent, ornate corridor. And in 1897, the combined Waldorf-Astoria Hotel opened.
It instantly became the largest and most luxurious hotel in the world, a truly iconic landmark of the Gilded Age.
Born purely from spite and rivalry, it demonstrated that even the most vicious family feud could be monetized.
But it also signaled a deeper truth, didn't it? The Astor family was sacrificing their residential roots and their claim to pure, untarnished aristocracy in favor of commercial reality.
And for William Waldorf Astor, the victory was clearly hollow. Despite building this landmark, he felt disgusted with American society.
He did. The sources confirmed that he relocated to England in 1891, beginning the definitive transatlantic split. He took his fortune and his family across the ocean, aiming to buy the legitimacy and stability he felt was impossible in the cutthroat, vulgar, new money environment of New York.
Caroline, however, remained the undisputed social queen of New York until her death, having outmaneuvered her blood rival, even if it cost her her home.
The family remained dominant in New York, and the mantle of the main American line passed to Caroline's son, Colonel John Jacob Astor IV.
And this wasn't just some rich heir. The sources describe him as an unusually dynamic figure.
Right, an inventor, a science fiction novelist, and a major real estate developer. He was responsible for building the St. Regis Hotel, among other projects.
And he was a Spanish-American war veteran. He represented the modern, active face of the dynasty at the turn of the century.
But despite his wide-ranging professional success, his personal life soon created a scandal that was just inescapable.
After divorcing his first wife, a move he famously waited to make until his fiercely conservative mother, Caroline, had finally passed away, he made a choice that shocked the nation.
Tell us about the wedding that shook high society.
In 1911, the 47-year-old John Jacob Astor I married 18-year-old Madeline Talmadge Force.
The sources emphasize the sheer audacity of this, a 29-year age gap, with Madeline being a year younger than his own son, Vincent.
In the stiff, morally rigid society of the Gilded Age, this was a complete break from decorum. The press had an absolute field day. The social censure was immediate and universal.
Priests refused to perform the ceremony.
They did. The public pressure and gossip were so intense they couldn't stay in New York. They had to leave the country.
Exactly. They embarked on an extended, self-imposed exile, a honeymoon across Europe and Egypt, to escape the relentless gossip and judgment.
And by early 1912, Madeline was pregnant, and they made the decision to return home for the birth. Their chosen vessel for the trip back was the world's newest, most luxurious, and supposedly safest liner.
The RMS Titanic. They boarded as two of the most famous and wealthiest passengers. John Jacob Astor V's net worth alone was estimated at $87 million.
A fortune worth billions today. They represented the peak of American wealth and prestige on that ship.
For the first few days, it must have been the peaceful, sheltered escape they desperately needed.
But on the night of April 14th, 1912, that tranquility was violently shattered when the ship scraped the side of the iceberg.
What did the accounts tell us about his reaction as the reality of the disaster unfolded?
The accounts consistently detail his reaction with immense clarity and surprising calm.
Despite the chaos and confusion, Astor remained remarkably calm and focused entirely on his young, pregnant wife.
He helped Madeline get dressed and escorted her, along with her maid and nurse, up to the frigid boat deck.
And here we have the defining, tragic moment of not just his life, but of the American dynasty's reputation. He helped Madeline into Lifeboat 4. What happened when he tried to follow?
He approached Second Officer Charles Lightoller, who was strictly enforcing the women and children first rule.
Astor, recognizing the rules but pushing for an exception, asked if he could join her, citing her delicate condition due to her pregnancy.
And Lightoller, resolute in his duty, refused him.
The wealthiest man on the ship, the patriarch of the American line, was told no.
And this is where his immense dignity shone through. The sources note that Astor accepted his fate immediately. He didn't argue, he didn't pull rank, he didn't offer bribes.
He simply asked for the lifeboat number so he could potentially locate his wife later, gave her his gloves, and stepped back.
He was last observed calmly standing on the starboard wing of the bridge, smoking a cigarette with his Airedale dog, Kitty, as the band played on and the ship tilted toward its final icy plunge.
That act of quiet acceptance, after a life of scandal and opulence, gave his death an undeniable nobility. It almost offered a form of moral redemption for a name long associated with cold indifference.
It absolutely did. Madeline survived, thankfully, and gave birth just a few months later in August 1912 to John Jacob "Jakey" Astor VI, the famed Titanic baby.
Astor's body was recovered a week later, identified specifically by the monogrammed initials on his jacket and the unique diamond ring he wore.
And we have that fantastic recent historical echo. The gold pocket watch recovered from his body, which had been restored and worn by his surviving son Vincent, was sold at auction in 2024.
For a record-breaking $1.46 million, it speaks to the enduring, almost mythical fascination with that moment.
It does. The death of John Jacob Astor IV was a seismic event. It extinguished the most powerful, dynamic American patriarch, forcing the fate of the enormous American fortune into the hands of his 20-year-old son, Vincent.
The American dynasty, unified under one massive financial structure, had suffered a blow from which it would never fully recover its unified power.
The Titanic tragedy serves as the perfect turning point for the divergence of the family into two distinct branches.
Right. So before we delve back into Vincent's troubled inheritance, let's go back to William Waldorf, who had already decided America was too vulgar for his tastes and sailed to Britain.
To understand William Waldorf's success, we need to contextualize his move within the wider trend of the Gilded Age marriage market, the so-called dollar princesses.
This was a massive social transaction where old European titles were exchanged for new American cash.
Exactly. We see this phenomenon across American high society, and the sources give us the perfect example. Consuelo Vanderbilt. These American heiresses, flush with fresh industrial cash railroad money, in her case would marry cash-poor but title-rich British nobility.
Consuelo Vanderbilt married the Duke of Marlborough in 1895. Her dowry was immense, calculated to prop up the sagging fortunes of Blenheim Palace.
This wasn't just a marriage. It was a financial takeover designed to keep an aristocratic estate afloat.
And what's truly fascinating is the global consequence of this seemingly simple transaction.
The sources reveal that Consuelo's marriage ensured that her cousin, Winston Churchill, whose mother was American but whose father was the 7th Duke's son, would not inherit the dukedom.
Because Consuelo produced two male heirs.
Right. And this freed Churchill from the aristocratic duties tied to the estate, allowing him the complete freedom to focus entirely on his political career.
So that American gold, transferred by marriage, arguably freed Britain's most legendary prime minister to focus on leadership rather than estate management.
It's incredible how these financial and social transactions between two families had such a colossal global ripple effect. And it was exactly within this framework that William Waldorf Astor's branch thrived on Albion.
Disgusted with the vulgarity of the Fifth Avenue feud in American society, William Waldorf used his vast fortune to fully embed himself in the British aristocracy.
He sought to replicate or even surpass the legitimacy that families like the Marlboroughs were receiving. He bought history, didn't he?
He absolutely bought history. He purchased magnificent country estates. He bought Cliveden, a massive, imposing estate, and most notably, Hever Castle.
Anne Boleyn's childhood home, which he meticulously restored.
This wasn't just buying property, he was buying historical legacy.
And he took British citizenship, achieved his dream, and was made a peer. The first Baron Astor, and later, the first Viscount Astor.
He had successfully laundered his American new money into legitimate aristocratic titles recognized by the crown.
And the political influence of this new British line was immediate and lasting. His daughter-in-law, Nancy Astor, became the first woman MP to sit in the British House of Commons, demonstrating their political clout was institutionalized.
They were powerful, prominent, and deeply entrenched in the political establishment.
They were, but their story wasn't without a significant tarnish, which our sources highlight, the Cliveden set scandal of the 1930s.
Right, this needs more depth to balance the narrative against the noble death of J.J. the Feat.
Absolutely. The Cliveden set was the name given to a group of influential upper-class political and social figures, including the Astors, who frequently met at their Cliveden estate.
And a controversy centered on their deeply conservative politics and, specifically, the accusations that they were strong supporters of Neville Chamberlain's policy of appeasement toward Nazi Germany.
So the suggestion was that this influential group, meeting privately at the Astor estate, was actively pushing Britain toward inaction in the face of Hitler's aggression.
Precisely. Critics accused the group of being overtly pro-German, or at least dangerously naive about the threat posed by the Nazis.
While the depth of their actual pro-Nazi sympathies is historically debated, the association permanently tarnished the British Astor's reputation.
They were linked, publicly and indelibly, to a period that is now viewed as one of Britain's most shameful diplomatic failures. They gained aristocracy, but they inherited substantial political controversy alongside it.
Meanwhile, back in America, the story is one of retraction, guilt, and reform.
Vincent Astor, who inherited the immense fortune at 20 after the Titanic disaster, was a radical departure from his cold, land-grabbing ancestors.
He was a man deeply burdened by his inheritance. The sources detail that he was plagued by a profound social conscience, specifically regarding the family's notorious reputation as slumlords.
He saw the slums and the misery his family had profited from, and he felt a visceral need to change the legacy.
He didn't just donate a small portion, he sought genuine, systemic reform of the family's holdings. He deliberately and systematically sold off many of the infamous tenement properties.
Sometimes on incredibly generous terms to the city for public housing development.
It was an intentional dismantling of the very foundation of the family fortune. He also diversified the holdings shrewdly, investing in media, notably becoming the chairman and principal owner of Newsweek magazine from 1937 until his death.
Vincent was the last true patriarch of the American line. He had no children of his own, and his half-brother, Jakey, the Titanic baby, was far less interested in the business world.
The consolidated American wealth was on borrowed time, and Vincent made the final revolutionary decision to dissolve the massive, centralized American dynasty.
When he died in 1959, he left the bulk of his colossal fortune, $67 million, worth over $700 million today, to his third wife, Brooke Astor.
With an explicit, clear command, give it all away.
That single, enormous act of philanthropy effectively ended the era of the Astors as the landlords of New York and scattered the great American inheritance forever.
It was an intentional financial suicide for the dynasty.
So the stage is now set for the final, heartbreaking act, centering on the woman tasked with executing the family's final philanthropic mission, Brooke Astor.
She married Vincent in 1953, and when he died, she took his command to heart. For nearly 50 years, she became not just a wealthy widow, but New York City's beloved First Lady of Philanthropy.
She was a transformative figure for the Astor name. She chaired the Vincent Astor Foundation, directing nearly $200 million, $195 million, to be exact, to countless charitable causes.
Funding parks, libraries, education, and museums across the city. She was revered for her style, her grace, and her immense generosity, earning honors like the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Her famous motto truly captured her philosophy, didn't it?
It did. It was often quoted. Money is like manure. It's not worth a thing unless it's spread around.
She dedicated her life to cementing a positive image for the Astor name after decades of controversy rooted in the slums. She even authored novels and autobiographies, charming high society and the public alike.
But as she grew older and descended into the fog of Alzheimer's disease in her final years, a horrifying hidden drama began to unfold behind the closed doors of her Park Avenue apartment.
This is where the story takes a dark, grotesque turn.
This is where Anthony Tony Dryden Marshall, her only child from a previous marriage, enters the scene as the villain of the final act.
And Marshall had an impressive, highly decorated background, right? A former Marine, U.S. consul, ambassador, even a CIA officer.
A life of service and influence, but one that ended in absolute public disgrace.
The unraveling became public in 2006 when Brooke's grandson, Philip Marshall, filed a lawsuit that exposed truly horrific elder abuse. The accusations were stomach-turning and immediate media fodder.
They were shocking! The lawsuit painted a picture of calculated isolation and neglect. The sources describe Brooke, in her frail state, being forced to live in squalor.
This specific, devastating detail was that she was often forced to sleep on a urine-soaked or soiled armchair.
She was isolated from her devoted circle of influential friends, including Henry Kissinger and David Rockefeller, making it impossible for them to intervene.
And the motive wasn't neglect born of apathy. It was simple, raw, financial greed.
Absolutely. Marshall was accused of systematically plundering her estate while simultaneously claiming, often publicly, that his mother was running out of money and forcing her to sell assets.
Yet records showed he was paying himself a multi-million-dollar salary to manage her dwindling affairs.
The indictment details his methods. Accusations that he sold her favorite Child Hassam painting for millions, and, most damningly, that he tricked his dementia-stricken mother into signing changes to her will.
Those changes were designed to divert tens of millions of dollars that Brooke had explicitly donated for charity, the final act of Vincent's reform, directly into his own pockets.
The scandal became a media sensation because it represented the most grotesque and selfish possible end to a legendary American dynasty. The final act wasn't philanthropy, it was filial betrayal.
After a long and sensational trial that captured the attention of New York society, Anthony Marshall was convicted in 2009.
Convicted of grand larceny and conspiracy for stealing from his own mother while she was helpless.
It was a shocking conclusion. Brooke Astor died in 2007, just before the final verdict. But the conviction ensured that the Astor name would be forever associated not just with billions and opulence.
But with one of the most infamous cases of family betrayal and elder abuse in modern history, Vincent Astor had intended for the money to be given away to repair the family's legacy.
But the final, shameful act of greed ensured the great consolidated American fortune was gone, and the American dynastic line dissolved in disgrace. So, if the American dynasty ended in dissolution, debt, and betrayal, what does the Astor name look like today?
Well, the contrast, as you suggested, depends entirely on which side of the Atlantic you look at.
Let's start with the thriving British branch, the descendants of William Waldorf, who bought his way into the peerage.
The British branch has succeeded beyond William Waldorf's wildest dreams. They continue their prominence and political connections on Albion.
The fourth Viscount Astor, William Astor, for example, is still an active, conservative, hereditary Lord Temporal in the House of Lords.
He is deeply entrenched in the political apparatus, and their family connections have only intensified.
Immensely. His wife, Annabel Jones, brought her daughter, Samantha, into the family. Samantha then married former Conservative Prime Minister David Cameron.
Which means an Astor is the stepfather of a recent, powerful PM. They have successfully inserted themselves into the highest levels of the British political establishment, securing a generational influence that rivals the oldest landed families.
And what about the other major British line, the Astors of Hever?
That branch, led by the third Baron Astor of Hever, John Jacob "Johnny" Astor, maintains the same high-profile connections. He was educated at Eton, served in the Ministry of Defense.
And his son and heir, Charles, married Princess Hélène Marie Giselle de Merode of Belgium in 2017 at the magnificent Hever Castle itself.
That marriage solidifies a continental royal dimension to their lineage. They are successfully perpetuating the bloodline at the highest possible European level.
They seem to be fully woven into the fabric of the current modern British elite, complete with their own celebrity status.
Exactly. We see their younger generations maintaining high-profile connections. For instance, Charlie "Shaky" Astor, grandson of the fourth Viscount, is known for his past romantic link to Pippa Middleton and runs a successful children's entertainment company.
Then there's the Rose Nancy Langhorne Astor line, which married into the Van Cutsem family, who have very deep ties to the crown.
Ah, yes. Rose's daughter, Grace Van Cutsem, became famously known to the world as the grumpy bridesmaid during the 2011 royal wedding, thanks to her pouting expression on the balcony.
These anecdotes show that the British Astors are fully integrated into the modern royal ecosystem. They bought aristocracy and they made it stick.
Now let's look back across the ocean at the fractured American descendants. The contrast is stark, particularly when we look at those who clung to the memory but lost the cash.
We have influential but disparate bloodlines remaining. Introduce us to Ivan Sturgevich Obolinski.
Ivan is a fascinating figure, a direct descendant of John Jacob Astor IV. His background is a blend of Russian aristocracy and American service.
His father, Prince Sergei, traced his lineage back to the Rurikid rulers of Kievan-Russell line, predating the Romanovs.
And Sergei was a white Russian anti-Bolshevik fighter who later served with distinction in the U.S. paratroopers and the OSS, the precursor to the CIA. Ivan himself co-founded a publishing house.
It's an influential pedigree, yes, but far removed from the consolidated core land wealth that defined the original dynasty.
But perhaps the most illustrative and paradoxical story of the current American branch is that of Alexandra Aldrich, the fifth great-granddaughter of John Jacob Astor I.
Her experience really crystallizes the final state of the American line.
Her story is the perfect tragedy of the American dynasty. She details her life growing up in Rokeby, the 43-room family estate in the Hudson Valley. This massive house was an actual crumbling monument to lost wealth.
A palace reduced to a mausoleum.
Precisely. She's famously quoted as saying that everyone assumed they were rich because she lived in a mansion, but she grew up extremely poor.
Imagine that cognitive dissonance. A 43-room palace filled with dust-covered antiques, ancestral portraits, and decay.
But the family was so land-rich but cash-poor that they often ate TV dinners discarded by a nearby factory due to her unemployed father and alcoholic grandmother.
Her memoir, The Astor Orphan, details a chaotic upbringing where the family was clinging desperately to the physical structures and the name long after the financial engine had sputtered out.
And this contrast encapsulates the final result of the American dynasty. In the United Kingdom, William Waldorf's line successfully leveraged American gold to buy their way into enduring aristocratic prominence, political power, and even royal connections.
While in America, the founding line, decimated by feuds, guilt, philanthropy, and betrayal, ended their run not in a blaze of financial glory, but in a shameful court case, and the heartbreaking reality of being cash poor inside a palatial ruin. What an immense story. I mean, from a German butcher's son to the owners of Times Square and the Waldorf-Astoria, the Astors truly were foundational to modern New York.
They built a dynasty that, for a time, felt as unsinkable as the Titanic itself.
The sheer physical scale of their influence is undeniable, but the internal price was just catastrophic.
The core lesson, as revealed in the arc of the source material, is that colossal wealth provides no armor against fundamental human tragedy or dysfunction.
The American dynasty didn't end with an economic collapse or a political revolution. It ended with intense family rivalry, guilt that demanded radical philanthropy, and finally, the most sickening betrayal of a helpless matriarch by her own son.
Vincent Astor began the intentional scattering of the immense fortune, and Tony Marshall ensured the final, shameful dissolution. The era of the landlords of New York is definitively over.
Which leaves us with this powerful question for you to consider. The Astors could buy castles, build libraries, and purchase British peerages. William Waldorf's line successfully transformed their American new money into enduring aristocracy, securing title and political power by leaving the country.
What then does Alexander Aldrich's story, the descendant growing up cash poor in a 43-room mansion, tell us about the ultimate staying power of the American dream of dynasty?
When the cash is gone, and only the land and the name remain, does the American model of dynasty inevitably fail, while the British model of title and establishment succeeds? Was the only way for the Astor name to survive to become fundamentally un-American?